It's a wonderful Wednesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Damichael Cole and I are back together once more. Consecutive days. What's happening? We're excited to talk about the idea of Memphis trading into the first round to try to acquire this elusive wing that they've been chasing. Starting lineup tweaks. Damichael heard about me talking about Jalen Wells and Zach Edey maybe going to the bench. We'll see what Damichael thinks of that, and we'll check in on the NBA Playoffs Conference Finals edition. It's Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks so much for being with us on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. I am one of your hosts, Joe Mullinax, joined by my wonderful co-host, Damichael Cole, Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee, award-winning Memphis Grizzlies beat writer, of course, covering the team for that wonderful publication. Make sure you're following him on X at Damichael C. Follow me on X at Joe Mullinax if you so choose, and we will be happy to bring you along for the next 30 minutes or so on this journey that we like to call Locked On Grizzlies. Make sure that you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing wherever you get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, Google. Make us your first listen each and every time an episode drops. Make sure you're an everydayer hanging out with Damichael and myself wherever you take in your podcast. It is all good with us. Damichael, so happy to be back with you. Look at us 2 days in a row.
2 days in a row.
Talking Grizzlies basketball. This is nice. And I do want to shout out Chris Harrington, who I like to say every once in a while is the one guy in Grizzlies media who's followed the team and written about the team in particular longer than me.
Chris Harrington.
Shout out to Chris Harrington. And again, others like Anthony Sane have been around a while, but Sane's more of the podcast, radio guy. I'm more the writer and podcasting later on. But anyway, nobody cares about that. I'm shouting out Chris Harrington of the Daily Memphian, and he does these mailbag articles, and he talked, I wish I could remember exactly who asked the question. It was a great question. Mm-hmm. And the point was made by this question that we talk a lot about the Grizzlies missing on trades, right? Kevin Durant, Mikal Bridges, Alex Caruso. These are all names that have either been realistically Cam Johnson, right? Dorian Finney-Smith, either realistically or unrealistically connected to the Grizzlies over the last few years, right? In trades. And then free agency, everybody knows Memphis being one of, if not the smallest markets in the NBA, just not a red-hot free agency destination. That's the reality. So the question was asked, if we keep talking about Memphis needing this actual wing, an additional big starting caliber wing, why not just go into the NBA draft? And my answer to that is absolutely not. Because again, are we trying to win a championship?
It's time to pull out your trademark phrase.
Why are we quintupling down on youth? Right? That's my absolutely not. But just to play along for the sake of conversation, you know, you have players that have skill sets as bigger wings that could be available in the later lottery. You know, play teams like the Rockets that maybe might want a veteran player that you could put together a package for. Teams like the Spurs that have multiple first-round picks. There's ways to envision Memphis getting into the middle of the first round and selecting somebody like the most recent huge riser in the last couple of weeks since the NBA draft combine, Cedric Coward, is someone that I've talked about here on Locked On Grizzlies. He probably you'd have to go into the first round to get him at this point. At least that's the way that it's sounding, given all that has come out of the combine. But somebody like Coward, who has a tremendous wingspan, a bigger wing, somebody like a Will Riley from Illinois, somebody like a Nick Clifford from Colorado State. I know people might get a little bit shaky talking about drafting somebody from Colorado State. I get it. You know, David Roddy syndrome is real. I understand. But I guess, Damichael, I'm curious as to your takeaways on this. Yeah, no, that's fair. I'm curious how you think about this logic of if you can't get one in free agency, which, again, there's possibilities, there's ways to do it, but maybe you think it's not going to happen. If you can't get one in a trade, and you've tried numerous times, and it's just impossible, apparently, to find a willing partner, or you're not willing to give up the requisite draft capital or young player, whatever the case might be, do you think there is legitimacy to the argument to Memphis trying to get into the middle of the first round and address this need for the Grizzlies roster?
Joe, I remember when I was a small kid, I got this advice from one of my older cousins. And I mean, you can say it probably wasn't great advice looking back on it, but maybe it was to some people. You know, some people grew up in those tough love type households. But the advice that he gave me when I was younger is that a man doesn't say I can't. You don't say you can't do something. That's what he told me. So how am I about to apply that to this situation? Is the Grizzlies are in a situation now where, to me, there's no such thing as, well, we weren't able to trade for him. Oh, we weren't able to get him in free agency. You got to up your aggressiveness. Now, I think if you look around the league, wings are at a premium right now, but there are routes to getting those guys. So to answer the question directly, there is no way that I'm looking at improving this team through the draft this season. At this point, I'm all for acquiring future draft assets and stockpiling assets into the future, but that's usually to kind of maybe offload a player, or we talk about them having 2 picks into the second round. Maybe you trade one of those second round picks and get a future, second round pick, or 2 future second round picks, or whatever the case may be. But in terms of moving up into the first round to get another young player on a team in a season where we're talking about it's going to be a pivotal season for not just the Grizzlies, but this core 3 of guys in John Morant, Desmond, and Jaren Jackson Jr. So with all that being said, I'm not going the youth route. And when I say that can't is an acceptable answer to me, I'm talking about the fact that you have a mid-level exception that hasn't been used since you signed Kyle Anderson. I wasn't even covering the team when they signed Kyle Anderson. I mean, I was in college. I was in college when they signed Kyle Anderson. You're talking about having the biannual exception. I don't know when the last time, not off the top of my head, I have to go look that up. I don't know when the last time they used the biannual.
Somebody will have to confirm this in the comments. Hit us up on X. Let us know if I'm right. I want to say that was Tyreek Evans back 2016, maybe something like that. I think that might have been the last time they used the biannual. It's almost 10 years ago.
So you're getting where we're going with this, where you're talking about the mid-level hasn't been, I guess, aggressive asset in roster building for the Grizzlies, but it's one that they have access to that can get them a good, solid wing. It's one, the biannual. In a lot of cases, depending on the market. Now, the biannual usually works out better for those bigger market teams because guys are going to take a little bit less money to go there, whatever the case may be. But still, you have those type of assets. You have, your future assets. The Grizzlies are one of the teams in the NBA at this point. When I talk to people around the league, they talk about how, man, the Grizzlies pretty much got control of all their assets of the future. Like, yeah, they just moved their first round pick for this season, but going forward, they got all the first round picks, and they have other assets, but particularly the trade swap they made, with the Suns, and I believe the Wizards is the other team in there. But they have some desirable assets where they can go out, in my opinion. Now, you might not be getting, Cam Johnson, so to speak, but you can get a wing that's more proven, that has more experience, and can put you in a better position on the timeline of this core than going out and getting another young guy and basically taking your chances with that. I just think the Grizzlies should be in another realm when it comes to roster building at this point.
They should be. I'm tired of seeing them rely on Ja and Jaren and Dez to be the veteran leaders. I think that if more than anything else, I think we have seen that is not. Obviously, you're not going to bring in a 4th, 5th, 6th best player on the team and they become the leader, the franchise, all that sort of stuff. There's a reason why they were interested in Draymond Green a few years ago, right? Like there's a reason. There's a reason why they tried for Marcus Smart. We make fun of it, but it's the dog mentality. They're trying to bring in guys that are like that. And while you can acquire that in the draft, most certainly, you're not bringing in someone that Ja and Dez and Jaren are going to answer to, look to, confide in, somebody that they can watch on the court and say, that guy is going to make it click for me from a draft perspective. Trade, free agency, there's more possibility with that. So I'm with you there, Damichael. Even though, again, we're going to talk more about Jalen Wells and Zach Edey here in a moment, 2 members of the all-rookie NBA first team, that's not what the goal is. That's not what the aspiration is. The aspiration is contending for a championship. And if you're to believe Zach Kleiman, and he's not just trying to appease fans when he says we're not close, Harrington wrote about that as well, saying that he thinks it was a bit of fan appeasement when he said that. It's hard to look, and we'll talk more about this later in the show, it's hard to look at 3 of the 4 teams in the conference finals and say, oh, yeah, Memphis is really far away. But we'll cover that more later on in the program. Let us know on X. Hit us up in the comments. Do you think Memphis needs to acquire this supposed important forward combo wing guy thing? Is the draft the way to do it? Damichael and I sounds like we think no, thank you. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we'll be talking starting lineup tweaks. We'll see how mad Damichael is at me for suggesting perhaps Jalen Wells and Zach Edey would be better served coming off the bench. Maybe he won't be mad at all. Stick around and find out. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by DoorDash. I got to tell you, Damichael, I sat down with my wife and I had a conversation with her about finances, right? And we're talking about things that we can do as the summer approaches to kind of tighten the old belt a little bit. And I put my foot down, Damichael Cole, and I said one thing that will not change is my love of DoorDash and DashPass. And thankfully, the NBA 50-point promo is making that a little bit easier for me to do. You know what time it is, NBA fans. Playoff season means big performances and even bigger rewards. DoorDash is bringing the heat with a slam dunk deal for DashPass members during the 2025 NBA playoffs. It's called They Swoosh You Score. Anytime a player drops 50 or more points in a playoff game, DashPass members score a free 3-piece crispy tender combo from Wingstop the very next day. That's good for a guy on a budget. Just place an order of $20 or more. Use the code Wingstop50 at checkout, and that combo is yours. Crispy, delicious, and totally free. Offer valid to midnight or noon to midnight the day after the game. Terms apply. Remember, you sign up for DashPass, unlock this and more exclusive deals all season long. When any player scores 50-plus points in a playoff game, DashPass members can grab a free 3-piece crispy tenders combo from Wingstop the next day with a $20 or more order and the code Wingstop50. That's DashPass, your door to more savings, more flavor, and more ways to win. Terms apply. All right, Damichael. So last week, I should say, I did a solo episode, and I flirted with the idea of, and again, a lot would have to happen for this to occur, like a trade of John Conchar and a trade of a G.G. Jackson, probably. Like there's levels to this that make it not likely, but it's the time of the year to dream, right? And I joked about it being Timberwolves South. There's a possibility that Naz Reid and Nickeil Alexander-Walker both walk from Minnesota because of the money crunch that is happening with the Timberwolves. And they both could, theoretically, come to the Memphis Grizzlies. And I made the argument that if that were to occur, I would start Reed and I would start NAW and I would move Jalen Wells and Zach Edey to the bench. And again, I want to stress, I'm not predicting that's going to happen. Extremely unlikely it occurs in that way. I do think NAW makes a ton of sense with that mid-level exception you were talking about.
Yeah, you like that one.
I do like that one. But Naz Reid's probably not realistic at this stage. But point being, do you agree with the possible line of thinking that if we're talking about contending for a championship,
yep,
2 sophomore starters, Jalen Wells coming off of injury, Zach Edey being flawed the way that he is. Edey is a talented player. I think that saying that he's bad or the worst draft pick in NBA history, that was all ridiculous, right? Like, he's not bad. You don't get named all NBA first team rookie being bad. But I do think it's fair to point out that there are limitations, especially defensively, right? His impact is going to be inconsistent, especially on the defensive end. With all that being said, do you support the idea of bringing in veterans, making them starters if they're caliber enough, high enough caliber, and having those younger players be reserves on a team that has higher aspirations than the 8th seed in the Western Conference?
This is what I'll say, and I think we're in different spots on this one, Joe. I think we're in different spots on this one. I'm not taking Zach Edey out of the starting lineup. It would take. It's possible, but it would take. I mean, you'd probably have to use that mid-level exception to get some type of player that would lead to me taking Zach Edey out of the lineup. And
let's take the hypothetical Naz Reid. Is Naz Reid good enough to you to take Zach Edey out of the lineup?
He's good enough from a talent standpoint, but here's how I'm looking at it. We're looking at it from how does this player complement the rest of the starting lineup? Zach Edey, as a rookie, was one of the better per minute rebounders in the league. Zach Edey was pretty much the only player on the Grizzlies who was an above average offensive and defensive rebounder. You had Brandon Clark, who was really good on the offensive glass, but was not good on the defensive glass. And then you had guys like Santi Aldama, who was good on the defensive glass, but the defensive glass was poor on the offensive glass.
Pause.
Pause. So with that being said, here's what I think. I think Zach Edey, he stays in the starting lineup. He's not leaving the starting lineup. I don't see it. I do not see it. Now, moving to Jalen Wells, there is a route there. And look, Jalen Wells is kind of, to me, one of your wild cards of the offseason. And what I mean by that is because with Zach Edey, I'm more confident in what he is right now because of, one, what he's shown, two, how Tomas Isolo has proven that he'll use him. Whereas with Jalen Wells, I think there are certain things that he could unlock in his game that we haven't seen much of yet. That'll take him to another level, and that could lead to kind of him solidifying his spot. But we haven't seen those things yet. So until we see those things, I'll be more confident. I've seen most of the things that I need to see from Zach Edey. We talk about, if he adds a hook shot and becomes a better isolation scorer, that'll make him, a much better player. But do I think he needs that in order for the Grizzlies to be championship aspiration? I'm not going to lie. I don't think so. I mean, he'll need to, like what we saw with Isolo, rim run, dunk the ball, and grab 13, 14 rebounds like he was doing. Whereas Jalen Wells plays on the perimeter. It's a much more perimeter-oriented league now. You're looking at some of the better teams in the league. What separates these teams, and we talked about this a lot, is having multiple guys on the perimeter who can be playmakers, secondary playmakers, and all these type of situations. You look at all the teams left playing, they have those type of guys. It's not just one guy mostly being relied upon. You see a lot of times the Knicks have success when they put Miles McBride in those lineups alongside of Jalen Brunson and those two bigger wings, and they kind of can play off of one another, so to speak. And Desmond Bane has grown in that area, but I think there's a lot of room for Jalen Wells, and Jalen Wells will tell you that himself. This is not some harsh critique of him. You watched him this season. You just go look at every shot that Jalen Wells took. You're going to watch a lot of shots where there's either 0 or 1 dribbles. So with that being the case, give him a little bit more leeway, as we like to call it, in summer league. We don't know really what it looks like. Jalen Wells gets the ball at the top of the key and pick and roll and kind of plays as a decision maker, or he's getting the ball, in an action and kind of working as a scorer / facilitator, setting up the offense. So we haven't seen much of that from Jalen Wells. He has, not because he can't do it, but more likely because he's in the lineup with John Morant and Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. And one thing that we learned over the course of the season with that new offense that the Grizzlies had with Taylor Jenkins and Noah LaRoche and those guys was they had pretty much 3 guys who were the primary point guys. And we would see Ja go off the ball sometimes, and that would mean Jaren Jackson Jr. was bringing the ball up the court, or Desmond Bane was bringing the ball up the court. Jalen Wells, if he becomes one of those guys, I don't take him out of the starting lineup, but that is the one position where I say that's where you could potentially see some movement. I think Zach Edey is pretty entrenched right now.
For the first time in a long time, and again, shout out to Chris Harrington. He talked about this as well in his piece.
Yeah.
This is not a team that you look at and say the offense needs to get better. For the first time in several years, it's the
kind of
defense.
strange, right? Yeah.
Right. And how do you make that improvement? How do you grow the team? And when your backcourt is Ja Morant, Jaren, and Desmond Bane,
it's already tough.
You're kind of limited, right,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of how you're going to improve it. So I think you're onto something in terms of Wells being the guy more so than Edey that maybe gets tweaked a little bit. But people will point out one of the best starting fives in the NBA when they were on the court together was those two rookies with Bane, Ja,
With those
and
three, for
Triple
sure.
J. So
Mhm.
is it something where you just improve the reserves behind them, right? Where you don't have to depend on a Santi Aldama, Scottie Pippen Jr. Those are guys that are key reserves moving forward for Memphis, you would imagine, especially Santi in his restricted free agency. I think that there will be a re-signing there. But you want to be able to say beyond those two in particular, and a Brandon Clark coming off of injury, Vince Williams Jr., Gigi Jackson. I think more than anything else, Zach Kleiman has learned you can't count on those guys. It would be wonderful if they came along, but because of injury, because of all of the other things that have transpired, you probably need to have a better plan than, oh yeah, Gigi and Vince are going to be there for us. Let Damichael and I know in the comments, hit us up on X. The starting lineup tweets, it sounds like we're closer to the same page on Jalen Wells, and I agree with you. I don't know that moving Zach Edey to center or to a reserve center role makes him more impactful, other than the chance to play against reserve bigs in terms of scoring. But the purpose of Zach Edey is to accentuate what John Morant does well, and that is what is going to make him that starter more than anything. Yep. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we'll close out this Wednesday edition of the show, taking a look at the NBA playoffs, just some overall takeaways from the conference finals currently ongoing. Stick around. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am one of your hosts, Joe Mullinax, joined by Damichael Cole, Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal, also my co-host here on Locked On Grizzlies. And Damichael will get out of here on this, talking about the conference finals. You know, you mentioned a little bit yesterday my hatred for Adam Silver as the worst commissioner in sports, and I stand by that wholeheartedly. But I do think that as you watch these conference finals, I'm a big fan of narratives. The crowning of the Oklahoma City Thunder is really the biggest takeaway for me in terms of I don't see anybody beating them. I don't see the Knicks. I don't see the Pacers. I don't think either of those teams have anything for the Thunder in a 7-game series. And that likely means, SGA maybe stakes his claim to the face of the league. You have a Thunder team that has all of the draft assets in the world. It's going to be fascinating to watch them in the years to come as the money dries up for them too. They can't pay all those guys, how they restock, how they reload, but it's going to almost certainly, barring some catastrophic injury, bring a title to OKC. And I don't think the fans are going to be that concerned about it after that title comes home. I'm also interested in your thoughts beyond that, acknowledging that OKC is kind of in a class of its own. The idea that Minnesota, Indiana, and New York are all so much better than Memphis, I'm really struggling with, because they all won between 49 and 51 games in the regular season. The Grizzlies won 48. And as we talked about on yesterday's show, and it was talked about in other, again, it might have been Harrington, shout out to Chris Harrington, but in other pieces that I've been reading online, the idea of the depth question, right? That was purposeful by Taylor Jenkins, playing 11 guys. And I think you talked about it on yesterday's show. That cost them some games early in the year. They would have had more wins if they hadn't deployed that plan. And I've seen that other places as well, not just from you. So I guess my overall takeaway is twofold. One, the Thunder are a monster, and I don't see them getting bad anytime soon. Two, OKC's here. The rest of the league is below them. I don't think that gap is that big. Are we prepared to say that Zach Kleiman was trying to appease angry fans in the presser? Because the way he made it sound, we were talking about Desmond Bane trades and, the national media saying, is John Morant available? The more time passes and the more that we actually talk about this, I don't know that those two things don't connect. If you're going to make a big blow up deal, it almost certainly would be a part of a retooling more than a chance to contend. Your best chance to contend is probably in the 3 that you got in the building.
Yeah. I think one thing I'll say is, even going to last season with Boston, the idea that, it's cliche, but a lot of cliches have real meaning behind them. Defense wins championships. And when you look at Boston with the ability to say, you can't just attack Derek White, you can't just attack Drew Holiday, you can't just attack Jason Tatum, you can't just attack Jalen Brunson, and you can't just attack Kristaps Porzingis or really even Al Horford. With that being said, and then you look at OKC right now, you can't just attack Jalen Williams, You can't just attack Lou Dort. You really can't attack SGA. A lot of people, I don't know if they really know that, but you can't. Chet Holmgren,
a better defender than he gets credit for.
Yeah, only because he's so good offensively. But again, when he came in the league, you can go look up all the reports and everything. The guy was a very touted defender coming out of Kentucky. And Chet Holmgren, you're not just going to attack him. That's he's going to have the second highest odds for Defensive Player of the Year coming into next season. And then same thing with Isaiah Hartenstein. And then, I mean, you can go off the bench with those guys. They even got more guys coming off the bench. Alex Caruso, Cason Wallace. So the point is, when you look at the Grizzlies right now, so I got to tie it in. How many guys in their I'm asking you, Joe, how many guys in the starting lineup are you saying you can't just attack them? Two guys.
Jaren Jackson Jr. and Jalen Wells. Can't just attack those two guys.
Two guys. We just named the defending NBA champions where there's no one in that lineup where you could just say, give me him. I'm about to have fun. That's going to be our mismatch. That's how we're going to create our offense and play off of that matchup. It's the same way, in a way, with OKC this season. If you look at, their turnover ratio is historic right now in the playoffs. I don't know if everyone's paid attention to it, but like their turnovers forced compared to the turnovers they've had is better than any Bulls Lakers team like in modern playoff history.
Time out. Are you trying to say that turnovers and limiting turnovers is an important part of winning basketball? Is that what you're trying to say? Because that's what I've been saying for some time.
Who would have ever thought, Joe? Who would have ever thought?
What an interesting thought process.
Yeah, so that's what it comes down to, to me at the end of the day. And yeah, when you go back to those games against OKC, that's what we remember, right? Grizzlies turned the ball over a lot. OKC forcing those turnovers because of the defense, but also because the Grizzlies were, sometimes careless with the basketball or whatever the case may be. Boston did it the year before to a lot of teams. So it all comes down to, look, not Taylor Jenkins, Zach Kleiman has the right idea saying we got to go get some dogs. We got to go get those rugged defenders so you can have guys on the floor that are going to be those defenders. And look, we saw it more this season with Ja Morant, with Desmond Bane, willing to say guys aren't just about to attack me for the entire game. But at the end of the day, Ja is $180 on a good day. So there's going to be, when LeBron James is in front of him and he takes that bump to the chest, like sometimes he's going to move back. It's natural physics. But at the same time, I think, the Grizzlies need to that's more of the blueprint in today's league. And then the other thing is more on the emotional side. That is the other part of it. I don't know, Joe. For a second, it was like, man, maybe this is Mike Conley's chance, after last season. And now starting to look like Mike Conley might not ever get that coveted ring. His Marc Gasol moment. I don't think it'll come.
He needs to go be the backup point guard for the Oklahoma City Thunder if that's what he's interested in. That he might have one more year on his contract, so it might have to be a trade.
Yeah, I don't know if Minnie's trying to keep him around with all those young guys they got over there. But.
Well, maybe Mike Conley as a backup point guard. Let Scottie Pippen Jr. Do a little stuff as a two-guard combo guard. Maybe there's something to that. I'd be down for it. But that could be a topic for another podcast. I think that the fascinating thing, and you touched on it there, and we can definitely talk more about this, ways that the team can improve that are realistic, right? Like asking Ja and Dez to become these all-world, or even SGA, who SGA is really good, but maybe not quite all-world because of his offensive usage. Asking them to be SGA is unrealistic, right? There's one SGA. There's a reason why he's doing what he's doing at the level he's doing it. But you mentioned being careless with the basketball. And as primary and secondary facilitators, limiting those turnovers is definitely something Memphis can get better at. And that is a point of emphasis for me and will continue to be, right? Jaren Jackson Jr. passing out of his isolation scoring opportunities.
I'll talk about it again. Yep.
And Ja and Dez being more cautious with the passes that they choose to make, because your offense, regardless of who is going to be taking the court next to these guys next season, you're not good enough to give up 12, 13, 14, 15 possessions a game in the name of trying to play fast. And I do think that is something that Isolo is going to prioritize. And watching Paris basketball, doing a little bit more research on him, the way that they have that big man and speedy point guard combination, I think there's something to that. And I think that you'll see an improvement there. At least I'm optimistic that we'll see an improvement there. But let Damichael and I know what you guys are thinking in terms of the playoffs, the conference finals, any major takeaways for you guys. Obviously, as the NBA finals get started, we'll probably take another look and maybe do a series preview in the next several episodes. Thank you so much for being with us on this edition of Locked On Grizzlies. It is much appreciated. Damichael, the month of May is closing. It's coming to an end. We're approaching June. That means we're getting closer to the NBA draft. That means we're getting closer to renegotiation windows. All sorts of angles that we can take as May becomes June here on Locked On Grizzlies.
Yeah. A lot of transactional periods are upcoming here, and especially when the season gets ready. I mean, the NBA Finals ends. It's going to be off and running from that point. But yeah, looking forward to kind of especially breaking down. There are some diamond in the rough type prospects. I know you like to get into some of that stuff, Joe. You like to try to find your guys late in the rounds and try to find your guys. So we'll kind of start. I'm going to start digging more into the draft talk and whatnot. I've just been pushed away from draft talk because of the fact that this is just such a win now season that's approaching for the Grizzlies.
And we could also talk about how the draft is being so impacted by NIL, right? There's more and more guys choosing that would be late first round, early second round picks.
Yeah.
They're choosing to make a couple $1 million playing college basketball and just staying in school. And that's
Yaxel would have made sense.
That's huge. Yaxel isn't Brandon Clark. He's Brandon Clark light. Like, I could see him being somebody that makes $50 million over the span of his NBA career pretty easily.
Yeah.
And he chose to go back to college. So definitely an angle we can take as May becomes June, as I said, here on Locked On Grizzlies. So make sure you're with Damichael and myself each and every time an episode drops. And make sure after you make us your first listen each and every day, make sure you're checking out for your second listen, Locked On NBA Big Board Show. NBA draft expert Rafael Barlow reacts to every workout, interview, and rumor leading up to the NBA draft. Find Locked On NBA Big Board on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Damichael, thanks so much for being with me as always. Thank you, our wonderful everydayers, for being with us. We're almost at 5,100 subscribers on YouTube. The podcast continues to grow by leaps and bounds, and we're very excited about future partnerships and future things to make the podcast even better. Hopefully you guys will be with us along for the ride, whether it's YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast. For Damichael, I'm Joe. We'll catch you back here tomorrow here on Locked On Grizzlies. Enjoy the day. Find yourself some Grizzlies basketball to watch somewhere, and we'll catch you next time. See you.